Hi everybody, Terry Ryder from hotspotting.com.au joining you for our monthly live Q&A, your opportunity to throw the questions you have about residential property anywhere around Australia at me, and I'll do my best to answer them. Firstly, apologies because this live Q&A session was originally scheduled to happen Wednesday last week. But at that time, I was seriously unwell and just not well enough to do it. I could barely speak. I had the flu, and so we had to defer 1 week. So apologies if you tuned in at that time and nothing was happening. But here we are, live on Facebook. Your opportunity to give me your questions about any of the issues that are occupying your mind about residential real estate anywhere in Australia, or about locations that you're interested in. Maybe somewhere that you own property, you want to know whether that particular location is going well, or somewhere that you may be considering buying property in, and you'd like to know what I think of that location. So please, whatever your questions are about residential property, please feel free to throw them at me by typing them into the comments panel you see in front of you as you're watching this live broadcast, the monthly Hotspotting live Q&A. Now, if this is our third monthly Q&A in this forum, and if this one is like the two previous, excuse me, you're going to find me a little bit throaty tonight. I'm still not totally over the flu, and I may even have a coughing fit or two. Don't be alarmed. But if this particular Q&A is like the first two that I conducted, there's going to be a majority of questions about location. And what I know to be true is that the thing that interests people interested in real estate, whether it's as home buyers or as sellers or as property investors, most of all is location. It's all about location. People want to know what I think about particular locations. And in response to that, we've increased the presence of location reports on the Hotspotting website. I'll be talking more about that as we go through the evening. But I just want to make you aware that if you go to the hotspotting.com.au website now and look at the homepage, you'll see and from the menu bar investors, click on that and you can choose from that locations, and there'll be a menu of reports in most of the states and territories around Australia, locations that we rate and one or two locations that we don't particularly rate, but we will always get a lot of questions about, such as Gladstone. We get a lot of questions, what's happening with the Gladstone market? Is it going to recover? When's it going to recover? We've posted a special report answering that question, and we're soon in the next few days going to post reports on other areas like that, including Darwin and the Northern Territory. The first of the questions have come through, and it's from Gretchen, who is asking, when do you see Toowoomba improving? Well, Gretchen, Toowoomba is a market that I'm eternally interested in. It's been a very good performer at different times in the past. Right now, it's kind of lukewarm and just meandering along. As markets always do, markets are never, there's no market that's strong all of the time. Toowoomba went through a pretty good growth phase a couple of years ago. It was at that time, it was in our hotspots report. We ranked it quite highly on a national basis because it's a very strong regional centre, a very diverse economy. Lots still happening. The new airport is now up and running, but there's other major infrastructure projects under construction, like the second range crossing development. There's possibilities in the future, such as the Inland Rail, which if it happens, if it goes ahead to full fruition, almost certainly will be going through Toowoomba. So a pretty good future for that city. I suspect that in recent years, because it was became known around Australia as a boom market, that developers built perhaps too much product there, and it's been suffering from no oversupply, not a particularly serious one, not like some of the markets in central Queensland, but I think it has been sort of pulled back in terms of capital growth by a large amount of new product in the market, but its time will come again. I think it's always going to be solid. It's going to be a safe place to own real estate. And in a couple of years' time, I expect it to be rising again. But right now, just a little bit quiet. While we're waiting for further questions to come through, please, any questions at all that you have on any subject of residential real estate, whether it be location or whether it be some of the issues happening in real estate, there's been a number of articles in various forms of media in the last week or so that I think are relevant to some of the questions I've been asked in previous sessions. A location I get asked about quite a bit is Townsville in North Queensland. Certainly that's a market that we are very interested in, because we're always looking to identify markets ahead of the growth, where we see signs of the market that's currently down but has the potential to provide good growth in the future. That's when we think is the best time for people to be looking at buying in these locations, and rather than what most people do, which is when they read there's a boom on, that's when they pile into a market, which means they're really too late to buy at the best time. And Townsville really fits that bill rather nicely. I think that Townsville's got a great future. It's always a very solid regional centre, very similar to what I said about Toowoomba, diversified economy, strong, major, important regional centre. Townsville, the capital of North Queensland, government centre. It's got so many different strands to its economy, and what's coming up in that market in terms of spending on infrastructure is going to make it a market that will make people stand up and take notice. And now's a good time to buy there, because prices are down after a couple of years of decline. There was an article out earlier this week showing that there was a new survey of business confidence, and showing that confidence among business owners and managers in Townsville right now is almost at a record high level. There's only been one time in the 27-year history of that particular confidence index where confidence in the business sector in Townsville has been as high as it is right now. And I think that's part of the evidence that I see that it's a market that's mounting a comeback, and one that people who think and act counter-cyclically should perhaps be interested in. Now, Dean is asking a question. What's happening in Brisbane? Pointing out that perhaps bought a property in some of the inner city areas 3 years ago, but it hasn't actually risen in value. In fact, Dean, you think that it's perhaps gone down in value. Yeah, I guess it's all about timing, and it's also about patience. Now, Brisbane hasn't really performed to its potential yet, and that's because primarily the underlying state economy of Queensland has been fairly mediocre in recent years. As you have heard me say a number of times in this forum and elsewhere, that there's a very strong correlation between the performance of the state economy and the performance of the capital city property market. New South Wales has been a very, very strong economy in the last, say, 4 to 5 years, leading the country, and Sydney's property market has responded to that. Number 2 has been Victoria, and Melbourne has responded to that. We've seen Tasmania climb up the rankings of the state and territory economies lists in recent years, and Hobart has responded to that. Right now it's the strongest capital city market with the greatest growth in prices. The Queensland economy has been right down, back in the pack, ranked sort of number 6, perhaps out of 8. Not really performing that strongly, and Brisbane's property market has been doing likewise. But there are signs that the Queensland economy is improving. Infrastructure spending is expected to lift. In Brisbane, it's another important factor. So do expect there to be better performance in the Brisbane market in the next few years. So it's a matter of being a little bit patient, dealing with that property that you bought. The other factor in play there, if you bought in the inner city areas, is that the oversupply of inner city apartments, which spreads not beyond the CBD up into the near city suburbs like Fortitude Valley, Bowen Hills, Hamilton Clayfield, New Farm, Wollongabba, South Brisbane, etc., Albion. So that oversupply is a factor that's helping to suppress property values at the moment. But it's a temporary situation. That market will recover, and so will the one which you have bought. So it's a question of hanging in there, I think, and waiting for a stronger economy, greater infrastructure spending in Brisbane by the state government and the federal government, and things will start to improve in the property market there. Jody is commenting on the Gladstone market. As I mentioned earlier, that's a market that we get a lot of questions about. Jody saying, I saw that the Gladstone has moved from the bottom of the cycle, which is a good sign. Do you see this continuing to improve? And also a question along similar lines about Moranbah, the coal mining town in central Queensland. Well, the short answer, Jody, is yeah, I do think that Gladstone's through the worst. There are growing signs that it's improving. Vacancies have come down a lot. There is signs of increased activity. There's signs of improvement, new projects coming along that would tend to generate jobs and therefore demand for real estate. And I do see improvement coming in Gladstone. Now, I mentioned earlier that we now have a location reports page on the Hotspotting website, and we have some special reports we're starting to put up there. The first of those is about Gladstone, and basically the report is titled, When's Gladstone Going to Recover? Because that's the question I get asked probably more than any other in real estate. And so that report actually answers in some detail that question and explains why we think better times are coming to Gladstone. Gladstone's been through this before. It's a very volatile market because it's so hooked into the resources sector, and any regional market that's so aligned to the ups and downs of the resources sector is going to have a volatile property market. Gladstone's boomed before, it was bust before, it boomed again 2011, 12 into 2013, and then went bust because of an oversupply of dwellings. Developers just went crazy and built too many new dwellings. It will recover and it will boom again and it will bust again. It's that kind of place. But I think, Jody, if you want more, the short answer is yes, I think improvement is going to come into the Gladstone market. And if you want to know more, our special report answering that question in greater detail is on the Hotspotting website on the location reports page. Dicker is saying, I'm interested to know your thoughts on the Cairns market, in particular older style units. So I'm aware some money has been spent on infrastructure in and around Cairns at the moment, and yields are attractive. You want to understand out things, Dicker, about the Cairns market is very high rental yields, probably the highest genuine rental yields anywhere in Australia. It's quite common to see median rental yields for suburbs in that market for 7 or 8%, particularly for small units. So that's an attraction of Cairns. Cairns is a pretty solid market at the moment. There is quite a bit being spent on infrastructure, hospital, airport, educational facilities. The problem that Cairns has always had is that it's an economy that's very much aligned to the tourism sector, and any economy that's very heavily reliant on one sector is always a bit vulnerable. I know that the authorities in Cairns, the City Council, etc., is and the local business community is mindful of that and has been working to diversify the economy to encourage investment with incentives for developers, for example. So hopefully over time that will change and Cairns will become a stronger, broader economy. I think it's certainly not the worst market to be in Australia right now, but right now I don't see it having a real estate boom. I think there are stronger prospects in other regional Queensland markets such as Townsville right now. Okay, Peter, your comment or question, the market in Montmorency seems to have dipped after a boom recently for units. Do you think it's a blip or will continue to fall? Peter, could you just get a little bit more information about Montmorency, just exactly where it is? I guess I tend to think, and we do our research in terms of towns, cities, local government areas, not so much individual suburbs. So while there are many suburbs where I can instantly place where they are, Montmorency is one that I can't quite place. So if you perhaps write in another comment, Peter, just exactly where that is, then I can perhaps comment on the general area. In the meantime, I'm going to refer to another one of the recent media reports that refers to location, which is pretty much the topic that everyone is interested in. Now, you'll probably be aware if you've been following our comments that and our various writings that we have a pretty high opinion, a higher opinion than most people of South Australia and Adelaide. We think it's very underrated. And one of the things that we notice is that there's significant improvement in the South Australian economy. It's rising up the ladder of rankings nationwide, and it's becoming stronger and stronger. And gradually, Australia is waking up to that point. Now, I've referred in recent weeks and months to a number of reports that have ranked South Australia's economy a lot more highly than people would expect. And there's a new report out this week, the National Australia Bank Monthly Business Index, which says that business conditions in South Australia are better than anywhere else in the country except Victoria. So it ranks South Australia number 2 amongst the states and territories of Australia in terms of business conditions. And that's just the latest piece of evidence that adds to all the other evidence that I've presented in recent weeks and months, speaking to the fact that South Australia is coming stronger. It's going to surprise a lot of people. And I think the Adelaide market, which is compared to some of the bigger cities, very affordable, offers great value for money. I think we're going to see growth in that market that will surprise some people. Okay, Peter, in response to my appeal for more information, Montmorency, 17 kilometres northeast of Melbourne in the Eltham, Greensborough area. Yeah, okay, now I can place it. Look, I think one of the problems for some of the suburban markets of Melbourne is a big uptick in the number of apartments being built. It's not just a Melbourne CBD, South Bank, Dockland sort of a phenomenon. It's spread to some of the suburban precincts, and a lot of new apartments have been built. In one respect, that's a good thing, because I think in terms of affordability, what we need to see is greater density in some of our perhaps middle ring areas of our major cities as a way of producing dwellings in good locations that are more affordable. So we've seen quite a bit of that in some of the areas, including the one that you mentioned, I think, Peter. So that sometimes there's a tendency for developers to overshoot the mark and build too much. I'm not quite sure whether that's happened in your area that you're referring to, but it's one that's a constant presence in the markets in places like Melbourne. Also in Sydney, lots of suburban construction of apartments. In one respect, it's a very good thing. But if they build too many, it can, if you're an investor in that market, it can suppress capital growth. John, another person asking a question about Toowoomba. One of the things I'm going to do tonight is take a note of the locations that we get multiple questions about, and if there's particular, and make sure that we produce a report on that location for the location reports page on the hotspotting website. If there's a particular location that you would like to see, a regional city or town or a suburb or a local government area in a capital city, let me know tonight, and we'll do our best to produce a report on that area if there appears to be interest from you, our followers and customers in a location report. Now, Toowoomba's come up a couple of times tonight. John, I actually answered an earlier question, but of course people come into the broadcast at different times, so you may not have heard those comments. Toowoomba has been a good performer in the recent past. Right now it's going through a bit of a lull in its market. There was quite a bit of impetus in the Toowoomba market from the coal seam gas industry, for example, in the nearby Surat Basin. Infrastructure spending that happened in and around Toowoomba gave that market a boost, but it's been through that phase. It's now going through a bit of a bottom of the cycle phase, I would suspect. But there's more to come for Toowoomba, and it's a very, very solid regional city with diversity in its economy. There's big infrastructure spending still happening and still more to come. Its importance as a city will continue to grow with the new airport that adds an extra layer, but the resources sector in the Surat Basin, particularly with gas, is going to be an important city going forward. So I think it's got good prospects for the future. Emma, your comment, Brisbane is expected to improve over the next few years. Do you think that the southern areas like Logan City are a place to invest, being between Brisbane and the Gold Coast? It's a good question, Emma. Logan City is a market a lot of people are interested in, firstly because it's affordable, secondly because it's strategically located halfway between Brisbane City and Gold Coast City. Thirdly, really good infrastructure. Pacific Highway goes down through Logan City, connecting Brisbane to the Gold Coast. So does the rail link. Lots of good infrastructure, particularly road infrastructure. I mean, there's 3 major motorways intersect at different points within the boundaries of Logan City. Lots of affordable suburbs. And so I think there's going to be ongoing interest in Logan from home buyers and from investors. A lot of interstate investors have been interested in Logan City because affordable, good rental yields, good prospects for growth because of the infrastructure. What I would say about Logan City, it's not the only place in Brisbane I recommend. I think people should also consider Moreton Bay region up in the north and Ipswich City in the southwest. But Logan City is right up there amongst the locations to be considered for good infrastructure, good transport links, affordability, and plenty of job nodes as well. You always got to keep in mind, not everyone works in the CBD. In fact, most people don't. And there's lots of jobs nodes down in that area. So it's a good one to consider. If I was buying in Logan City, I would be looking at the established suburbs close to where the rail lines are, where the big retailers lining the Pacific Highway, the existing infrastructure, whereas the new suburbs are being built further west. And right now there's not a lot of infrastructure there to drive growth. Jody's asking about Moree in New South Wales. I've had property there for some years. It hasn't gone backwards, just slow growth. I don't see it booming. Look, Moree is one of those places that I think has potential. It's certainly very affordable. It's got very good rental yields. It's got a tourism industry. It's got a strong agricultural sector. It's a place where there's been a number of alternative energy projects proposed, such as wind and solar farms. It kind of needs some of those projects to take off, to take its market to another level, and to drive some some real estate growth. So that's the factor that's missing from markets like Moree, I would suggest at this time. Mick is asking, do you see Melbourne West, Werribee, Melton as a good place to invest for short or long-term capital growth? Well, I'd say, Mick, 1 to 2 years ago, a great place to invest because those areas, Wyndham City, suburbs like Werribee and Wyndham Vale and Hoppers Crossing, already had massive growth in the last 12 to 24 months. Melton has also joined that party. So the best time to have bought there was 1 to 2 years ago. There's probably still some growth to come, but I would suggest that the bulk of the growth that's to be had in those markets has been had, and that you might be better considering other areas. One of the things that's significant is that the growth that we've seen in Melbourne started in the inner city, rippled out through the middle ring suburbs, then to the outer ring areas like the ones you're talking about. The local government areas are Wyndham City and Melton, for example. And now we're seeing it happening in the regional towns and small cities not too far from Melbourne. And that's where I'd be looking. Ballarat's one place that I'd be looking for growth. I mean, it's already happened in Geelong. It's happened in some of the towns down in the far south east, such as Officer and Pakenham. So those are the sorts of places that I'll be looking for. Excuse me, a ripple effect. As I said in the introduction, I'm still recovering from the flu, so you're going to hear a little bit of coughing. Don't be alarmed. I'm going to do my best to shoulder on with a gravelly voice tonight and answer your questions as best I can. Lynn, We've been renting out a 4x2 investment property in Mussellbrook for 3 years now. Started out great. The rent was almost $500 a week. Then values and rents went down, starting to slowly creep back up. What are the prospects for Mussellbrook? Yeah, well, I think it's one of those places where you need to be patient because there are signs of improvement. It's a little bit like what I said about Gladstone. Mussellbrook was a boom town 4 or 5 years ago, probably about the time when you bought there, Lynn, and it looked great for a while. And then what happened is what happened in other places where there was a major uplift because of the coal industry. Developers built too much new product, and then the coal industry had a bit of a downturn. So an increase in supply coincided with a decrease in demand. There's very strong evidence that towns like Mussellbrook and other nearby towns in the Hunter region, such as Singleton, are coming back quite strongly. There's vacancies have dropped a lot. Sales activity is rising. We're starting to see rents and prices rising again. So I think you're going to see better times ahead in Mussellbrook and other similar nearby towns. Okay. Daniel, what's your view on the Gold Coast and the suburbs like Nerang? Seems to have gone well recently, but has the best already come and gone? Look, I think my general view of the Gold Coast is that it got an uplift 2 to 3 years ago, and it's had a couple of good, strong years. Partly that was the absorption of previous oversupply in the apartment market, and partly that was jobs created by infrastructure spending, some of which, not all of which, was related to the upcoming recent Commonwealth Games. So I think that my feeling is most of the uplift that the Gold Coast was going to get from the Commonwealth Games has already happened. It happened in the construction phase of the infrastructure, which brought a lot of new people into the Gold Coast in construction jobs and related areas. And so there was an uplift in demand for real estate right across the Gold Coast. And we saw a big uplift in activity for a couple of years, and prices responded. But that uplift in activity has now subsided, and we've seen a lot of those markets plateauing out. Now, the Gold Coast real estate industry is trying to talk up prospects for a big lift post Commonwealth Games. I'm not sure that a big boom is going to happen post Commonwealth Games. I think the biggest uplift was had before the Games for the reasons I've just said. But I think it's going to continue to be strong so long as developers don't oversupply that market too much. The Gold Coast continues to be a massive population growth centre. It's now one of the biggest cities in Australia. It continues to grow in big leaps every year, and I think it's definitely got a future for investors. I would suggest concentrating on the areas like the one you mentioned, Nerang, the inland, genuine residential markets, not so much the high-rise markets, because too prone to creating oversupply, which means that capital growth prospects have been suppressed over time. Anthony, my thoughts on Armidale. I see public services moving there next year, and a few other infrastructure projects are underway, including the airport expansion. Good time to invest in this market. Yeah, Anthony, very interested in Armidale. It's I'd say that New South Wales is a place right now where the strength in the market is in the regional areas. Sydney's obviously been through a major boom. That has passed. We're now well past the peak of that boom, and now we're going through a phase where there's going to be, I think, some minor price correction in Sydney. But meanwhile, there are a number of very strong regional towns and cities in New South Wales that are coming strong. And Newcastle has been very strong in the last year or so. Other places right around the state of New South Wales are coming into periods of growth. I think Armidale is going to be one of them. You mentioned some infrastructure projects. There's a very big wind farm. I think there's a solar farm, major project, expansion of the airport, expansion of the hospital, and there's that factor of the relocation of a government department from Canberra to Armidale, which is largely, I think, the influence of the local member, Barnaby Joyce, who until recently was the Deputy Prime Minister. So that transfer is underway. I think it's a done deal, even though the local member is no longer the Deputy Prime Minister. And so those are all factors that suggest that Armidale is going to be a place that's worthy of interest. It's very affordable. Prices, compared to the major cities, are attractively low. Rental yields pretty good. It's got a very strong. One of the things I like about Armidale, it's not just an agricultural town. It's also got a strong tourism industry. It's got a very strong educational sector. It's got boarding schools. It's got the University of, I think it's called the University of New England, major campus there. So it's got several strings to its economic bow, and I think it's got that plus the infrastructure spending plus the transfer of the government department from Canberra to Armidale means it's a place that's certainly worth considering. Okay, just pause for a moment. Try and keep my throat moist because, as I mentioned at the beginning, still recovering from the flu, and likely to have the occasional coughing fit throughout this live presentation. I was talking earlier about Adelaide. Well, I think it's an underrated city. We're going to be seeing bigger and better things than many people expect from Adelaide. One precinct that stands out there is the local government area of Marion. Part of that is what was known as the Townsville Innovation District. It used to be a Mitsubishi car plant. The car plant closed down, and what often happens is that lots of negative publicity about the closure, but less publicity about the positive that comes out of it. And in this case, this Townsville has emerged as arguably Australia's most exciting innovation district. It's one of the things that's special about Adelaide. It's I think the Australian capital of high-tech innovation. It's one of the reasons why its economy is coming strong. And that precinct, the Townsville precinct within the local government area of Marion, is a market to keep an eye on. I rank it very highly on a national basis at the moment. A second question tonight about Moranbah. Now, Moranbah, I quite often get asked about Gladstone and Moranbah in unison. Moranbah is a coal mining town in central Queensland where, for a period of time, it was the greatest property boom story in Australian history, really, because the median price at one point was $50,000, and over 10 years it went to $750,000, and then dropped a lot because the mining companies decided to stop paying those very high rents. They were paying up to like $1,500 a week to rent houses, decided that was crazy, started building accommodation camps and using fly-in fly-out workforces. And at the same time, developers jumped into Moranbah. So it's a similar theme that you hear recurring again and again, places where mining-related boom, but a increase in supply coincided with a drop in demand for various reasons. In the case of Moranbah, was the accommodation camps and the fly-in fly-out workforces that started to become common. So now the question is, will Moranbah recover? And when will it recover? Well, there are signs that it's now starting to recover. Vacancies, as in Gladstone, have dropped a lot. We've seen an increase in sales activity. First signs of rental and price growth. It's got a long way to go, though. The median price for a house in Morton at one point was over $700,000 and it dropped below $200,000. So it's got a way to go. If you bought at the peak of that market, it's going to be a long wait to get back to those levels. It may never get back to those levels. But whether or not you should hold your investment property, it's impossible to answer without knowing more about your circumstances. It very much depends on when you bought and how much you paid, what you own, what other assets you have, what other things there are in your real estate portfolio. There's no one right answer to that question, unfortunately. Now, if you'd like a more detailed answer, Angela, one of the things I do provide is a one-on-one strategy session for people who would like to have a chat for 45 minutes, explain the situation and get my thoughts on what they should do in situations like the one that you described, and that happens via Skype or Zoom. so that we can have a face-to-face conversation about your situation and ask all the questions you want to ask. Because in this forum, you're kind of limited by asking, what do you think about Moranbah? We can't have a detailed discussion about your circumstances, which is very relevant to answering the question, should you hold that property or should you sell it? I need to know a whole lot more about your situation, Angela, before I could answer that question definitively. And so that one-on-one strategy session service is available if you're interested. If you go to the Hotspotting website, click on the mentoring in the menu bar, and you'll be able to find out more about that. Mick is asking, how many more years do you anticipate that Sydney will be sort of at the bottom, bottoming out, to invest again in Sydney, Inner West, Parramatta, Fairfield? Well, look, I think it's going to be some time before Sydney rises again. And keep in mind that the gap between booms in Sydney, between the one we've just had and the previous one, was something like 10 years. Now, it probably won't be that long this time, and for a very important reason. The reason why there was such a 10-year gap before the most recent boom, in which Sydney really didn't perform at all, was a great underachiever of Australian real estate. The reason for that was because the New South Wales economy was so poor. It was actually ranked second last, I think, at one point. In the ComSec State of the States report, it was performing so badly. It had a very, very bad, in my opinion, state government. Wasn't spending on infrastructure, wasn't governing in the normal way. And the New South Wales economy stagnated, the Sydney economy stagnated, and the Sydney property market responded to that. Right now, New South Wales is the strongest economy in Australia, has been for a number of years. A lot has been spent on infrastructure, more than anywhere else in Australia. So that's going to put a floor under values, I think. I don't think the correction in prices we're now seeing is going to be particularly big. I think it's going to be a few percent over time. And I think Sydney is going to continue to have a strong property market, a solid property market, because the underlying economy is very strong and because the spending on infrastructure is so big. And there's more to come, like the airport and the transport links that will go to the airport, and a whole heap of other things that are happening. We saw some funding in the federal budget last night for some of those Sydney projects. So I don't think the wait is going to be as long for the next Sydney uplift. I think the downturn phase is going to be relatively benign, despite the fact that Sydney property values are so high. The high values in Sydney, I think, are supported by its status as an international city, which is attracting a lot of wealth, both from within Australia and from overseas, and the strength of the economy that underpins it. Okay, let me just look at a few more. Sorry, Rajwinder, you've got a question about a location in Sydney, but I'm not recognising. I think there's a typo there. I'm not quite clear which place. So if you wouldn't mind typing in a more detailed question, so I can understand which location in Sydney you're asking about. Okay. Ellen Marshall is asking for my thoughts on Bendigo. Yeah, Bendigo in Victoria, very solid regional city, sort of place that I like because it's it's a large regional city. It's got a diverse economy. Money's been spent on infrastructure there. It's growing. It's got a big medical sector and education sector. Some significant sort of manufacturing happens there. A number of businesses located in Bendigo which operate nationally and internationally. It's got good proximity to Melbourne. It's got good transport links between Bendigo and Melbourne. So always solid. Right now, it doesn't seem to be rising particularly strongly in its market. Ballarat of those two places is the stronger market right now, but Bendigo solid. and its turn no doubt will come, but needs to be catalysts in its economy. It's always about the local economy, I believe. And Bendigo, very solid in that regard, but not booming. So needs something perhaps a little bit more to be a catalyst to bigger growth in Bendigo. Sam asking about Townsville. Sam's just tuned. I did actually answer some questions earlier about Townsville, Sam. Do you see potential for capital growth in that market? Well, yes, as I said earlier, I certainly do in Townsville. It's a good time to be considering it because it's been through a few years of downturn. Prices are down, the buying is good, but what's coming up in Townsville is quite massive. The infrastructure spending, the other projects, its links to the resources sector, the diversity of its economy, its tourism sector, its government sector, its educational sector. I think it's going to come strong. There's already signs, and actually I did read Sam a little bit earlier, and I'll just refer to it briefly again. A survey of businesses in Townsville. It's a quarterly Townsville Business Confidence Index, which has been published quarterly apparently for 27 years, and the latest index is the highest reading in that index in terms of high confidence among business owners and managers in Townsville, the highest ever except for one time. So it's the second highest in the 27-year history of that index, charting confidence in the Townsville business sector. Those sorts of things are important to the property market. It's a sign that that market is about to come into a growth phase. And I believe we've got Townsville in our national top 10 best buyers report. You can get that on the Hotspotting website. That's our most popular report, National Top 10 Best Buyers, and Townsville features in it. But you can also go to the Hotspotting website and buy our report just on Townsville on the location reports page. Those reports are $55, including GST. It's pretty good value for money. If you're interested in a particular location, like Townsville, as Sam and one or two other people earlier tonight have been, it's for a relatively small sum of money. You can get a very detailed report explaining why we think that market is a place worthy of consideration by property investors. Okay, moving on. Okay, so Rajwinder, sorry if I don't pronounce your name correctly, but you're asking about a location down near Campbelltown. Look, Sydney generally is past its peak. I think most of us are aware of that. But the areas that still maintain some strength in terms of elevated sales activity and price growth are really those areas down in the southwest around Campbelltown. That's going to continue to be a growth area because there's land available for future housing estates, for more suburbs. There's a lot of infrastructure spending being focused on their new rail links, motorway links, etc. There's definitely a strong future. It's one of the most affordable areas in a city where affordability is an issue. So I think Campbelltown and nearby Camden are going to be locations that are going to continue to attract interest from home buyers and from investors. And it's certainly going to attract a lot of interest from state and federal governments as places that need big money spent on infrastructure, because that's where a lot of growth in terms of population is going to happen. So it's certainly worth considering. If a lot of people, for whatever reason, want to invest in a particular city, if you want to invest in Sydney, I'd suggest, well, there's better cities around Australia to invest in, but if you're particularly strong on needing to invest in Sydney because you want to invest in your home city or in your own backyard for various reasons, then I would be suggesting follow the infrastructure trail. There's a lot in planning, there's a lot underway in the Sydney metropolitan area. That's where the new infrastructure, like the new airports and the associated infrastructure, is going to happen. That's where we're going to see growth in real estate moving forward from this phase where Sydney has passed the peak of its boom, is now winding down. Okay. Okay, so Ryan is asking first question tonight that's not about location. Good on you, Ryan. Asking about banks' attitude to interest-only loans. I think you're referring to the fact that they do charge higher interest rates for those types of loans. And will they relax that anytime soon? Well, I think eventually they will. But right now we're in that phase where, as a result of the APRA crackdown, that they're adjusting their loan books to have fewer interest-only loans. There's certainly no ban on interest-only loans, but they're trying to perhaps discourage them. And one of the means by which they do that is by having higher interest rates on those types of loans. And but the lending scene is changing all the time. It's changing almost daily. And we recently saw APRA lift its previous 10% growth cap for loans to investors. That's gone now. That's freed up the lending market a little bit. But the cap on interest-only loans of all sorts is still in place. But eventually it will be lifted once the banks get their make the necessary adjustments, and there's evidence they've already done that to a large degree. So I don't think it'll be too long before that's relaxed and we get a more level playing field for that type of loan. The main problem that exists is those who have interest-only loans and what the situation will be when they come up for transition, whether you're able to organise another interest-only loan or you have to transition to principal and interest loans, in which case there's a likelihood that your monthly commitment repayments will rise. Okay. Okay, so I'll just pause there waiting for some more questions that come through. What's the time here? We've been going almost an hour, and we've certainly had a lot of questions, different locations around the country, and one or two questions not relating to a location. Just referring to some recent media on location, including some of those that we particularly favour. There was a report about a week ago in which the noted demographic expert Bernard Salt, who writes columns in major newspapers and is famous for his comment about smashed avocado, some of you may know him for that, was speaking at an event in the north of Brisbane, the Moreton Bay Region Business Conference Series. He actually launched that particular conference. He made comments about the growing, diverse and aspirational region of Moreton Bay. That's the Moreton Bay local government area, the affordable northern suburbs of the Brisbane metropolitan area. Bernard Salt told the audience Moreton Bay has become a substantial economic force in its own right, with a gross regional product of 17.3 billion. You know, it's a major economy, it's a major market, and one I think that is worth paying attention to. Affordable, good infrastructure, very active in terms of buyers, probably the most active market in Brisbane at the moment, and proximity to a number of very major jobs nodes, remembering yet again that most people don't work in the CBD of Brisbane or the CBD of any city. Most people out there working in suburban jobs nodes, and this Moreton Bay region has got quite a few, or is close to some major ones, such as the Brisbane Airport and the Brisbane Seaport, and all the industrial commercial stuff that's sprung up around that. Okay, so certainly Bernard Salt sees a major future for that economy, and I think springing out of that, there's a good future for the affordable real estate in this market. Suburbs such as Campbelltown, Moree Field is one cluster. Then you've got the Redcliffe Peninsula, which is another cluster within the Moreton Bay local government area. That peninsula is as it's a peninsula, it's almost surrounded by water. It's kind of that kind of lifestyle. Pretty affordable, most of the suburbs there, and boosted by the completion of rail linking it to central Brisbane, which was completed about 18 months ago. There's also some rail infrastructure improvement coming up for the Sunshine Coast. And also, well, actually there's two important pieces of transport infrastructure that are going to benefit the Sunshine Coast and the links that has to Brisbane. One is the upgrades to the Bruce Highway, the major motorway link between Brisbane and the Sunshine Coast, and the other is a major upgrade to the rail link between the two places. And there was announcement of major funding in the federal budget last night for the rail link component. So the Sunshine Coast is a market that we rate very highly. It's been in our National Top 10 Best Buys report for a couple of years. So we've recently taken it out because we think we've told people enough about the Sunshine Coast, but it's going to continue to be a growth economy and a growth market, very much a transition economy. It's becoming much more diverse, much stronger. The real estate market is responding to that. And the big thing about the Sunshine Coast is the spending on infrastructure, which you add up all the projects, the infrastructure projects and other developments recently completed, underway or proposed for the Sunshine Coast, it totals more than $20 billion. And I don't think there's another regional city anywhere in Australia that has that much happening in that regard. So it's certainly a market with a big future. Righto. So just turning back to some of the questions that Michaela is asking about local council issues currently going on. Oh yes, in Ipswich. Ipswich is a very promising local government area and probably the most affordable market in the Brisbane metropolitan area, and some significant economic events there, including a $5 billion defence contract, which is going to benefit primarily the Ipswich city area. What Michaela is referring to is strife at the political level, local government area level, where a number of local politicians have been sacked and charged with alleged impropriety in their dealings with the council there. These sorts of things are particularly helpful, but I really don't think that they have a major long-term impact, Michaela, on property values or the performance of the property market. Far more importantly, because what you find is the economy of Ipswich is going to carry on regardless, even though there's lots of internal upheaval in the Ipswich City Council. We've seen that happen in locations around Australia quite frequently. Councils have been sacked for all sorts of reasons, but the local economy trucks on, jobs are still happening, and houses are bought and sold. So I really don't think it's a big factor for Ipswich. What is a big factor is that $5 billion defence contract, the ongoing expansion of the RAF base, the ongoing expansion of the Springfield master plan community and all the infrastructure that's happening there. Those things I think are far more important. Okay, Ryan. So Ryan has attended some conferences, particularly in his line of work as a cameraman. Lucky you, Ryan. Presumably you get to attend these events for free, and while you're doing your work, you probably learn heaps about whatever the conference is about. One you attended recently claims there's a shortfall in Melbourne of 500 dwellings a week for tenants, which will inevitably drive up rents. Look, yeah, there's all sorts of figures bandied about when people talk about there's a shortfall of dwellings, they're usually working to a formula which says Melbourne's population is growing by X. That creates demands for a certain number of new dwellings per year or per month, and we're not building that many, therefore there's a shortage. It doesn't necessarily stand up to scrutiny. Quite often those formulas they use to say if we've got this much population growth, therefore we should be building this many new dwellings, it doesn't take into account a whole heap of factors. A lot of Melbourne's population growth is overseas migration, and it's a question of what do those people do when they arrive in Melbourne? How do they form households? Do they stay with relatives, family members who are already here? It doesn't necessarily translate into the same level of demand for new dwellings as might be the case from, say, interstate migration or a natural increase through, the increase through births over deaths. So I'm a little bit sceptical about some of those figures. Melbourne, I think the market is generally in balance. There's probably pretty strong ongoing demand for new house and land packages, and balancing that, there's a very major supply of apartments in the inner city and some of the mineral-ring suburbs. So one balancing out the other and probably arriving at a neutral situation for Melbourne, I would suggest. Mel Mac, keen to know your thoughts on Tweed Head Shire and Byron Bay Shire. I think Tweed Heads benefits by being part of, even though it's in New South Wales and the Gold Coast is in Queensland, it's really one big sort of urban area. And certainly the Statistic Bureau tends to treat Gold Coast Tweed Heads as one urban area, even though there's a state border in the middle or down in the south of it. So there's plenty of growth happening for Tweed Heads. I don't see it as being, if I had to choose one market that I wanted to invest in right now in Australia, I think Tweed Heads would be it. That's not to say it's a bad place to invest. I just don't rank it that particularly highly. I don't see anything massive happening there to include it in the national top 10 best buys report, for example. At the same time, I think it's a good solid place which benefits by being part of the Gold Coast Tweed urban area, which is one of the population growth areas leading Australia. The other part of that question, I think, related to Byron Bay. I've never been a big fan of Byron Bay. I know that it's had a surge of price growth in the last year or so. A lot of locations in New South Wales had, partly as a spin-off on what's happened in Sydney and partly for local reasons. Byron Bay to me is a little bit like Noosa in Queensland, which over the last 10 years has been a very poor performer on growth, but it's now starting to become good because of things happening around it. Generally, as you know, if you read my stuff and you listen to my comments, it really comes down to your local economy. That's the thing, that's the prime driver, not the national economy, not the level of interest rates, not tax benefits like negative gearing. It's about what's happening in your local economy. Is it growing? Is money being spent on infrastructure? Are jobs being created? Because out of all that comes demand for real estate. If you have an economy that's very much a one industry economy, then you're not going to have long-term sustainable growth in property values, I don't think. That's been a problem for Noosa. It's a problem for the Sunshine Coast generally until recently when it started to diversify its economy, and now it's a much stronger economy and a much stronger property market. Byron Bay, as far as I know, is essentially about tourism, and as long as that remains the case, it's always going to be a market that's not over, say, 10 years, isn't going to have a particularly strong capital growth rate. It may have short, sharp spurts of growth for various reasons, but long-term, I don't think it's going to be a major performer. And you always should ask yourself the question, if you're considering buying in a particular area, ask yourself the question, is this the absolute best place that I can invest in Australia right now? Because you should consider all of Australia in your market and ask that question, is this the best place I can buy? Is this the place that's going to give me the best growth? And I don't think the answer to that question is yes, if you're talking about Byron Bay. There are plenty of other places I'd rather buy than Byron Bay as a property investor. Okay, so we're now at 8:30. We've been going for an hour. As I mentioned in my introduction, I'm still recovering from a bout of the flu, which is why we had to postpone this Q&A session, which was originally scheduled for this time last week. I'm probably getting close to the limits of my endurance because I'm still recovering from that bug. So I might call a halt pretty soon. We'll certainly answer a range of questions. I just want to remind you that in response to this ongoing demand from you with questions about location, we've increased the presence on our website, hotspotting website, devoted to individual locations. Primarily, we have tended to focus on top 5 and top 10 reports, top 5 Brisbane hotspots, top 5 Melbourne hotspots, and not featured individual locations so much. But we've changed that because of the weight of questions I'm getting from you, our customers and our followers, about individual locations. So now you can go to the Hotspotting website. On the homepage, you'll find a menu bar. It says Investors. When you look there, you'll see the option to click on Location Reports, and there you'll find a menu of locations that we currently rate quite highly. So we have individual reports you can get on those places, and we'll keep adding to it because the message we're getting from you is that's what you want primarily. So go and have a look at it and see the locations that we currently cover. We're going to keep adding to it, and if there's particularly a location that you would like to see a report about it, drop us an email, let us know, and we'll do our best to respond and produce a report, particularly if there's multiple people asking about a particular location. Tonight we've had several people asking about Townsville. We already have a report about Townsville on our location reports page on the Hotspotting website. We've had several people ask about Toowoomba. We've previously featured that in our hotspots report. We will update our Toowoomba report and include that on the location reports page. A number of questions, as we often do get, about Moranbah. So we will produce a report answering the question, when will Moranbah recover? Just by way of closure, Dean has come back and asked the question, where is the best place to buy currently in your opinion? Now, Dean, that's one of those questions that I wish I could give you a definitive answer to. But the problem is there's no one right answer to that question. The answer depends on the individual. The right answer for you will be different from the right answer for me. It all depends on who you are, how old you are, how much you earn, what you already own, where you already own real estate. And so the answer, I could have 5 different people and the answer might be different for all 5 of them. But places we currently do rate has been amongst the best. I mentioned earlier in the broadcast the Marion local government area in Adelaide is one we rate very highly. We think Adelaide generally is underrated, and within Adelaide we think that Marion local government area is probably the best precinct to focus on for value for money and for growth drivers. We certainly, amongst regional areas, we rate Newcastle and the Hunter region very highly right now. We rate Townsville and North Queensland very highly. We have some in our national top 10 best buys report. We have a couple of locations in Perth, including the Joondalup precinct. I'd certainly rate that very highly on a national basis, and it's an opportunity because prices are down after 4 years of decline, but that market is now moving into a recovery phase, and now's the time to be considering the Perth market. In the first place I'd consider as an investor would be that Joondalup precinct. The suburbs surrounding Joondalup is kind of a suburban CBD with lots of amenities and infrastructure there. It's quite an amazing collection of services, and the suburbs surrounding that I would consider would be very high on my list of places to consider. Hobart right now is the strongest market in capital city Australia, but the best time to buy there is past, so we no longer include Hobart in our national top 10 best buys report. It has been in recently, but we've now taken it out because it's already well underway with its boom. So where else? I've mentioned some places in Adelaide, Dean. I've mentioned some places in Perth. So a couple of regional areas. The Moreton Bay region I mentioned, I spoke about at some length earlier in the northern suburbs of Brisbane. I'm starting to consider Ipswich City in the southwest of the Brisbane metropolitan area more and more strongly through recent announcements and because of its affordability. So those are just some of the options, but as I say, there's no one right answer, but those are some of the places I'd certainly consider in my short list of 5 or 6 that I would consider, Dean. Daniel is asking a pertinent question. The location reports that I refer to, are they included in your annual premium membership? Well, yes, they are. That's the whole point of premium membership, Daniel, is that if you're a premium member, you get basically all the reports that we produce, the top 5 reports, the top 10 reports, the price predictor index, the monthly editions of the Ryder report, and now these location reports, many of which are included in our top 5, top 10 reports anyway, but some of them aren't. And increasingly, the stable of location reports will be more than what's included in the top 5, top 10 reports. So if you're a premium member, Daniel, you do have access to those. Okay, that's probably going to do me for now, guys and gals. As I say, still not 100% well, recovering from the flu. Had to postpone last week and defer it to tonight. Feeling a lot better, but we've now been going for over an hour, and I'm starting to get a bit throaty, so I'll call a halt. And thank you for your questions and your participation. I hope you found it informative. The feedback we get is always really strong and positive. So I'm going to continue to do these every month around about this time of the month, usually early in the month on a Wednesday night, because there's such good engagement and participation by you, our followers and customers. So I will leave it at there. Just remind you again that we now have the location reports page up on the website. So go and have a look at it. And if you see a report on a location that you're interested in, please buy a report. They're only $55, packed with great information as to why we have the opinion of those locations that we do, and also be aware of that one-on-one mentoring service that I provide. It's also, if you go to the mentoring page on the website, you'll find some information about the one-on-one strategy session, which is a one-off thing for 45 minutes. For some of you who asked a short question and got a short answer tonight, you can get a more detailed response and perhaps put in the context of your own personal circumstances by having that one-on-one strategy session. So that's it for now. It's time for me to sign off before I lose my voice completely. Thanks for participating. Hope you found it informative, and look forward to communicating with you again in coming days with my live rants and the next live Q&A, which will be on about a month from now in early June. So that's it for now. Ryder from Hotspotting signing off. Thanks for participating. Talk to you again soon.